So welcome, everybody. Woo. Very excited to introduce our guest tonight. I want to say first that this evening has been very generously supported by a number of other departments across campus that I'd like to highlight. Of course, the School of Architecture and Dean Speaks, the Middle East Studies program, the departments of Art and Music, History, English, Communication and Rhetorical Studies, the Humanities Center, and the SU Library. So that's quite a range of intellectual areas of study, and it's just really fantastic that they wanted to support Noushin to be here. So I want to give just a brief introduction before I hand it over to some of the students from NOMAS, but I first became aware of Noushin in my research for the forthcoming Bloomsbury Global Encyclopedia of Women in Architecture 1960 to 2015 that I'm co-editing with Dr. Karen Burns, which will be out, we pray, by the end of this year. We discovered, because this has not been so publicly published, that in 1976, women from across the globe met in Ramsar, northern Iran, for an international architectural conference called The Crisis of Identity in Architecture, which was the theme, which was a part of the Union Internationale des Féminines d'Architecture that had been founded in Paris in 1963. This is an incredibly important organization, bringing together women. It's still in existence. It meets globally every several years. And so Karen and I became aware of this material, that there was this event. It was hosted in Iran, and we were super excited to find out about it, and in fact has been incredibly influential in our project. Lo and behold, I met someone in September who knew Noushin Ehsan, and in fact, the woman I met, Manya, her mother also attended the conference. And why it's so important is because Noushin was one of the key organizers of this conference in Iran. So it was like hitting the jackpot that, you know, I became connected to her, and she's graciously given us access to her archives. So this is phenomenal. There'll be other work that will emerge from this, but it's just a pleasure to be able to bring her to the school. So with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Nomas, please.
Sorry. Hi everyone, my name is Ayana Askew, and I am the program's co-chair of NOMAS, and I would like to welcome you to the first event of Women's History Month. And although we will be moderating this event, it was funded by the School of Architecture, Middle East Studies program, Department of Arts and Music, History, English, Communication and Rhetorical Studies, the Humanities Center, and SU Library. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge, with respect, the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral land Syracuse University now stands. Tonight's event will be a presentation by Noushin Ehsan, followed by an audience Q&A moderated by our program's chairs and apprentice, Calvin, Jamaica, and myself. In her talk, Noushin will read a few excerpts from her book, a memoir, The Making of a Woman Architect, which discusses her personal journey as a young child in Iran, whose foremost ambition was to become an architect, and the sometimes difficult paths she navigated as she achieved each of her goals. Noushin will focus on the qualities it takes to establish and lead a successful international practice of architecture planning, and will share her philosophy that all architects must possess a desire to use their knowledge and talent to serve humanity. Her doctrine, called Spirit of Space, denotes that an architect must understand the value and impact of subliminal feelings of joy in spaces and the impact of creating designs that sing. To achieve this goal, Noushin believes the architect must employ a holistic approach to craft designs that are timeless, promote positive emotions, and work towards contributing to a healthy society. I'll now introduce Programs Chair and Apprentice, Calvin and Jamaica, to read a few words about our presenter.
Thank you. Noushin Ehsan AIA is a licensed architect with over 50 years of international experience. She resides in Manhattan and is the president of the Second Opinion Design, where she guides each project to a better result. She also consults with national and international governments on their architectural and planning projects. In addition, she lectures about spirits of space at universities and institutions throughout the world. In 1985, she founded Accessible Architecture PC, where she promotes the concept of design for all in a way that uplifts mind, body, and spirit. From 1974 to 1985, she was the managing director of BEB Consultants, an architecture firm based in New York, London, Paris, and Tehran. Her projects were built in the USA, England, Holland, Portugal, Saudi Arabia, and Iran.
Professor Ehsan has taught at many universities, including Rensselaer Polytech Institute in Troy, New York, and Polytechnic Institute of London. Also was an adjunct professor at Harvard Graduate School of Design, Massachusetts and Architectural Association, London. She studied architecture at Tehran University and took École des Beaux-Arts Paris, also received her master's degree in architecture and urban design from UCLA. She is a recipient of several honors and awards, which include the Design Merit Award from Hunter College in New York City and the Business Achievement Award for Betterment of the City of New York. In 2022, she published Noushin, a memoir, The Making of a Woman Architect. She is Baha'i, and her faith is the center to her activities.
Without further ado, we will hand it over to our presenter.
After this beautiful introduction, I don't know how I can please you, but I have to thank really, really sincerely the Dean of your school, Mr. Dean Michael Speaker, who had invited me to join you, and also many, many thanks to our friend, my newly friend, very dear one, Professor Laurie Brown. It's very difficult to summarize a book and a story of 78 years of my life. I'm 78 years old. However, I would only jump through it and say my background as both sides of parents is Muslim, very traditional and very steadfast Muslim, who were very wealthy also. But at some point, my parents, my father was a philosopher and my mother was a very young, beautiful, 25 years younger than my father, got married, and soon after my birth, they became Baha'i. Baha'i is a religion after Islam, and doctrine of Muslim is that anybody who leaves Islam and goes to another faith has to be killed. So with that little background, there is a lot of cultural darkness and up and down that you can read in a book, and I don't get to it. However, with very sad and incidental accident that I had from age of 6 months, I was all my life ill, and I had 14 operations since age of 14. So with this background again, you understand that the word controlling me as you can't do this, you can't do that, was part of my life. To the extent that every morning my parents will come, put the thermometer in my mouth and say, am I allowed to get out of bed or not? And I would put the thermometer on top of my tongue in order to not to show the fever, and I would get out. Because I had a sort of I was driven, and I don't know how. Yet, in the age of 9, I said that I want to be an architect. I said, what? Where does that come from? And I have a very large extended family of over 500 people, from doctor, engineer, philosopher, writer, no architect is among them. No one knows where the word come from, but I remember when I was walking on the street in Tehran with my parents, I would say, when I become an architect, I will do this and that and that. With this little background, I want to show you one of the most important foundation of my life, and that is when my father gave up the university and decided to go to a village and raise me by himself. I was his favorite. I was the last of the 3 daughters, and he wanted to show up that it didn't matter to him that I'm another girl. It's all those funny cultural stories that I would refer to you to read the book. It is different than what you think, but it's fun. But nevertheless, he resigned from university. He went to this village away from Tehran to simply raise me as sort of help me to heal me by homeopath. And I was only 6 years old, and that village didn't have a school. So he decided to go and to other family in the village, ask their kids come to our home, and little by little our house became a school. And I'm just going to ask my friend Lori to read the setting of this house in order for me to tell you a story which is very profound for my life. Please, the first one.
Can I borrow?
I can.
No. Okay. Our house in Khanabad was encircled by tall brick walls, and a broad metal barred gate protected the entrance. The yard was sprinkled with numerous fruit trees, including cherry and plum, and flowers of all kinds. We also had a gigantic oak tree that stood to the left of the gate. A long cobbled walkway linked the gate to a large pool, which was in front of the formal section of the house that was used as the school. The opposite side of the house contained our living area.
With that understanding that our house had a very long corridor ending to the gate, and then the front was the school, and the back was our private home. It was 1955, which was one of those uprise period of mullah, means clergy in Islam, to go against the Baha'is. And this mullah was very famous and advocate that any teacher of Baha'i faith should be killed. And my father was considered the Baha'i teacher only because little by little the entire village became Baha'i by the help of my father and my mother, who was coming every weekend. So with this fatwa, which with order of the mullah, other villages around ours got together, plant a seed how to come and kill my father. And in a 6 or 7 years old, I was always told by my father, you have to have siesta after lunch. And of course, that was the reason that I was in this village to be healed. But nevertheless, as soon as I would find he's asleep, I would get out of the bed and run and play with other villagers or so on and so forth. For that reason, I had made a hole in a wall to go outside, and nobody knew how I get out. That day that I was playing alone, and no one knows why we didn't have our servant who was also with us. It was usually me, my father, and this male servant. That servant wasn't there, and I was not playing with my other friends in a village. I was playing near the gate of the house. All of a sudden, I hear a group of mob chanting, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, means provoking God, and the voice became stronger and stronger, and the gate of our home was always open, and they came through the house. As they came to house, there were about 100 of them, and they had axes and all kinds of agricultural device, and they saw me playing near the gate, and they said, go and tell your father we are here to kill him. Can you imagine? I ran behind, as I said, private part of the house was behind the building. And I went and woke my father up, and my father usually carried the tradition of being a professor, always wearing a suit, white shirt, tie, and laces shoes, even throughout his time in village, which we were there for 6 years. So he got up, and I told him, I have a hole in the wall. Nobody will see it. I can hide you. Dad, they're here. They're here to kill you. He was very, very quiet, very sort of silently putting his clothes on, tie on, clothing his tie of the shoes, and not saying one word to me, and came out of the back of the house in the front, marched toward the mobs that they were coming in. And this corridor was very, very long, and they were coming in, and he was facing them while his hand was behind himself and gazing on their face and going forward. All of a sudden, the chanting of the mob stopped, and they stopped marching in front of him. And here I am hugging a tree in the oak tree, and thinking any second my father would be chopped to pieces in front of my eyes. But he went further front of them, even though they had stopped. And then they began to go backward, got out of the gate. At the time he was closing the gate, I ran under his arm, and he put his hand over my head, and he said, if you have faith, you don't scare. Now that I wrote this book, I realize that has been foundation, sorry that I'm getting still emotional, foundation of my life. If you have faith, you don't scare. So anyhow, as I said, I wanted to be an architect, and there were many, many hurdles that I had to climb over, and eventually I did go to a school of architecture. The first time I failed because there was a national exam, and this national exam was the type that you have to be very quick with reading, I didn't know why I did fail, because in the age of 40, I realized that I have a severe dyslexia, and I had no idea, and nobody even tested me until myself after I was told, why don't you speak English? My sister made fun of me, Professor Ehsan, you are so many years in America and you don't even speak English well. Oh my God, she's right. Only because I never enjoyed reading. And no one knows, why I wasn't following the path of my family, who were all in literature, philosophy, and so on and so forth. Anyhow, I did go to a school of fine art for 3 years, and I blossomed over there, but I didn't give up my goal as to being an architect. As soon as the format of this examination changed, I studied, and I did pass, and I did become architect, and I did the first year, always through all my career and while I was a student, I had to work also. That's another funny stories along the way, but I'm not going to get to that. I was in second year student. I won an award of best design of an arm, and that had to be built in Paris. Then I got a scholarship in France, and I went to École de Beaux-Arts. I came back, and eventually, even though I was the favorite student of the dean of the school and the whole university, there was an incident that, again, I let you read it and know, while all my life I've been afraid of publicity, and yet you will see at some point I was publicized a lot, but nevertheless I was afraid. But that incident caused me that I had to leave the university, and I had to finish my master somewhere else. I had only 2 courses before finishing the master program in University of Tehran, and I had to leave the university. I was at the time, also, as I said, I was simultaneously working and studying. I was working with a very good firm who was doing the master plan of Tehran, and Gruen from California were a partner of the project, and one of my boss was Iranian-American who studied at UCLA and came back to Iran and was my boss. I asked him, Mr. Ghaffari, do you think I will succeed in America? He said, yes, you do succeed in America. The word that he said was sat in my heart so strongly that I didn't need to know how and why and where, in what way. Even though I didn't speak a word of English, my French was my only second language. And my parents, because they didn't want me to go to America, they denied to help me economically. I came with $300 in my pocket without knowing a word of English. Only I knew how to design architecture. And I was adamant, I will succeed. The story of how I succeed, how I got within the first week job in Office of Architecture, how within 9 months I became head of the design department in Benham Kite in Los Angeles. Those are stories that it might interest you to read. Some of them are funny, some of them are tragedy, but nevertheless, UCLA was the only school that says we are not going to accept you because we have only master program, and we don't know your school, and you don't have a separate bachelor that we understand. Okay. As soon as somebody tell me you cannot do or you are not able to do, get here, that was my mission. I had to go to UCLA, even though Pennsylvania University, at the time of Louis Kahn, they accepted me just like that. And the funniest story that how they accept me and how I hold them, and I thought that because they accept me so quickly, that means they are not a good school. I didn't know anything about anything of America. All I knew, I would succeed. So I eventually went to UCLA. Believe it or not, I got even a scholarship at UCLA. And simultaneously, I work in Benham Kite, and Benham Kite made me, granted me the green card. My thesis finally finished at UCLA, and the thesis was very urbanistic and very futuristic and was chosen as one of the best theses of master program. They sent it as a sample of university to different university, and Dean of RPI called me and said, we want to offer 3 years contract of assistant professorship to you. I said, me? Teaching? I still don't speak English well. It's so funny that he was adamant that this is a good direction for me, and he said, I said, I'm not going to leave my office. They just got my green card. They spend lots of money for hiring lawyer, and I would be dishonest to do that. He said, go and talk to your boss. Go and talk to Harvey Perloff, your dean. Go and talk to your professor. How could I forget at this moment his name? And I'll call you next week and tell me your answer. And I went and talked to my boss first, and I said, of course I'm not going to go anywhere, but did somebody by the name Patrick Quinn talk to you? He said, yes. How could I stop your future? How would I be able to be good with my conscience? I mean, everybody wrapped me up that you have to go. So I bought a car, newer car than I had from one of my professors. The reason I'm mentioning the car, that car is even a very lovely story behind it. And then with another Iranian girl, we camped through the whole, from East Coast to West Coast, from West Coast to East Coast, and I came to RPI. I blossomed in RPI, even though, as you see, still after 50 years in America, I still don't speak well English, but nevertheless, after first year, and I was the first woman professor at RPI. The dean of the school asked me to go and meet somebody by the name Robert Bryan, who's coming from California, and he's a known architect in there, and we want to hire him as our professor. And he asked me to go alone. I said, me alone? No, 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 no. That's too much responsibility. The guy is coming, and anyhow, he said, please apologize that I cannot be there because provost has called me, and you have to go alone. Being stubborn, I got out of his office. I ran to one of our professors. I invited him to come along with me, and we went there. And as soon as Bob Bryan came out of the gate, I would like you to read my impression of him.
I guess I should just use yours. So I remember my first glimpse of Bob Bryan as he strode through the airport gate, a tall, handsome man with a prominent mustache who sported a shoulder bag made of stylish black leather. My first impression was that he looked quite pompous. I didn't feel an ounce of positive energy emanating from his demeanor. Nevertheless, he was very presentable.
To make a long story short, after a lot of battle, he was hired, and after 2 years, he followed me in Iran, and we got married in Iran. So, and we opened an office called BEB Consultant at the time, which was a gold rush of Iran. Every company that was somebody would come to Iran to get some project. And so, and it was also the government rule that they all have to have 51% of their fee or task given to the local architect. And being the president of the firm, I was considered local, so we were very much wanted. And at the same time, the Shah Banu, the Queen of Iran, approached me to say, go and I want you to organize International Women Conference, which the first one was in Paris, and the second one would be in Tehran, in Iran, in the town of Ramsar. I denied. I said, no, I don't believe woman architect, man architect. This is absolutely nonsense. We have to stop this, because when I came to America, I really did not feel the pain of women's liberation. In Iran, I was one of the 15 in my class as a girl. We had an Iranian professor who was an architect. It was a completely different background I had. So the Queen, instead of being angry at me, he said, can you possibly go and think of few good reasons that maybe you would want to help us to have this conference? She didn't say, don't do that, or we'll do without you. And I went and I thought about it, and I found that, for instance, every 4 years, Shah of Iran used to have conferences inviting all the big architects of the world, including Louis Kahn, including in this one, it's the Buckminster Fuller, and many others. And if you want to know where I am, they were giving me pointer, and I said I don't need it, but I'm there on the right, on the second one. But nevertheless, we never had any woman architect speaker. For that reason, and the reason that, for instance, everywhere I would go, I would be the only, I'm on the first left, only woman architect, and I just thought maybe it is a time to have focus our effort to present the ladies architect. Believe it or not, we had easier task to find woman architect everywhere than America. In America, we only could find Dennis Scott Brown and Anne Tang, and another lady who is not in this picture. Anyhow, The conference was fantastic, and now I'm going to ask Lori to read, please.
The conference was held in the city of Ramsar on the Caspian Sea during the summer of 1976. The event was widely publicized, and a great number of stories about my colleagues and me were published in Iran's top newspapers and magazines. Most interviews were flattering and provided excellent publicity for our newly formed firm, although I worried that some headlines were a bit sensational, with titles such as Women from Manicures and Pedicures to Architecture and Refined Architecture Done by Women. In general, the articles were quite complimentary and informative.
But as you see, the publicity, which I was scared of, was no longer fearful because I was all over the paper. And at the result, we had a lot of projects and one of them was this. One of them was this 42-story hotel, which was the first high-rise hotel that was built in Iran, and I was partner in charge. I had to go to France to bring a specialist for seismic analysis, and because Tehran is in a zone of earthquake, and then also collaborated with Pierre Dufault, who's a very well-known architect of France for hotel design, and went on and on. And among many projects, which, as you see, I don't have even any picture. All my pictures are only chosen by what I could find in magazine, because we left eventually Iran in one suitcase. Anyhow, this project has a very amazing story behind it, because I was delivering baby when I was given this project. At the meeting that I was sitting, I was having traction, and I don't want to spoil the stories, are very, very, very unusual, and in some point, I don't want to say heroic, because I don't advocate for many people go through that, but nevertheless, we were giving this project condition that we presented in 10 days, only 10 days, the model and the elaborate presentation of it for the Shah of Iran. And we made them impossible possible, and at the result, when we presented to the Shah's partner who had engaged me, but really, the stories are so detailed and so unusual that I would really want you to read it, especially women, to see how strong we are, physically and emotionally. We can even hold our pain and not to feel it if we want something. And that, my want was, at that time, was this project, to get it. And then I had to hold the baby myself until. Anyhow, I remember when I was having the last meeting was over, and I was able to connect to my pain, labor pain. I was taken to hospital by my doctor, his office was right next to when we had the meeting. And at the hospital, when I was saying, "Baby, please come out," my mother says, "Because you don't have time?" "Baby, please come out because I want to go back to work." That kind of character. But nevertheless, the project was amazing, and there is a coincidence that they named the project after my son, who had nothing to do with knowing that my son's name. My son's name is Babak. Babak in Persian means little Bob, and Bob means door. And my ex-husband, who was Bob, when I told him we are going to choose Babak for the name, he said, "Absolutely, little Bob, sure." And Babak is the name of a warrior, famous warrior in Iran. And they have, for the first time, gave a name of Babak project as a warrior, because this was an army housing. It was originally 30,000 unit housing. I'm sorry, the 3,000 unit housing, and then became 5,000 unit housing. Anyhow, We did a lot of other projects. This is Arabic, it's in Riyadh. It's a major government project. And then we did another project with Skidmore, Owens, Marantz, which is a very large hotel and condominium project. And you cannot believe when we were at the Gold Rush, when I say it's just the big project was common, just every, nothing was small. Then another 1,000-unit housing for faculties, and then this hotel project, which I received the award for it. It's called Karvansara. It's basically in an old fashion, when there was an inn, the king with caravan would go and stay around the sort of a courtyard, and all their horses and animals stay on the level below, and then the room above on second floor would be the room to sleep, and the king would be on top. So I used that concept, and this hotel was supposed to be prototype in a hot climate area. So I raised the top room and over the pillot, which none of this will show, but nevertheless, underneath of it, like fountain going one to another, water running around, and the inside courtyard was also part of the outside courtyard, and changed the direction of each room to the way that block the sun and the balcony be there. And so underneath, everything were connected, and a lot of water, a lot of cooling. Concept of traditional concept became a very modern hotel. And for that reason, the Princess Shah's wife presented me the gold medal, and that was one of the things that I was proud of it. However, not many good things last, and revolution began. Would you kindly read that?
Using the term wildfire isn't an exaggeration. One of the most savage events of the revolution occurred on August 19, 1978. Cinema Rex in Abadan was filled with young people who were watching a Western movie that apparently was not approved by the mullah. Deciding to make an example of those who defied their authority, the revolutionaries locked the theater doors so no one could leave and set the theater on fire. Everyone inside perished. This was just the first of many horrendous acts to keep citizens in line.
So we left Iran with one suitcase, and yet we left 1 week before the Shah, not because of not coming back. We thought we were coming back within a week, and the reason for our departure was to present our project, which was a museum in Berlin, and come back. But my husband was going to go alone, and he says, I'm not going to go without you, because he was afraid that we may not be able to come back. So as soon as we left, Shah of Iran left, and then the door got closed, and then we were not allowed to go back. We established ourselves in London, waiting every day that things changes. Nothing changed. And I'm calling Iran, all the staff, and I had a very large staff. Among the 60 staff I had, 30 or more were foreigners, from American to European, Indian. Every one of them were not allowed to leave a country, because they passed a law that anybody who is foreigner cannot leave until their boss comes and signs the release. The firm that they are working for, the president of that firm comes and signs the release. Now I am in safety in London with my child and my husband, and everybody tell me, don't dare to go back. You are Baha'i, you are woman, and you have worked for the Shahs on many projects. So definitely you are going for death sentence. And I keep thinking, how could I leave all those staff behind and be in a safety? Until finally my mother smuggled herself. When my mother came to London, I told my husband, then our child has a father and grandmother. Now I owe it to the staff to go back. This was a very, very tough decision. It wasn't as much tough for me as it was for people who love me. And finally, I went back. As soon as I arrived in Tehran, my brother said, "In what language do I tell you don't come?" I said, how do you know I'm in the list? Blacklist, they call it. He said, the only way you know is when they are going to, when you want to leave the country, you have to give your passport 5 days before, and then they investigate on you, and you have to go through the custom and all of that, and either they will give it to you at the end and you can fly, or they will come and arrest you. So I came out of the gate, and I went to another gate and gave my passport, and I said, okay, 5 days I'm here. And now I have 5 days, which from the moment I arrived to the end, that is, I left eventually, and I'm here with you, is a story that they call it 5 Days in Tehran. Everybody says it should be a book by itself, but nevertheless, it's a chapter of the book. Every single moment of it are amazing stories. But my mission was to give the staff, so directly from airport, we went to all the government agencies. One by one, I got all their exit visa, and it took me another day and a half to only find them, because they were all hidden all over Iran, all over Tehran, and finding and giving their exit to them. But then afterward, I became stronger and did this and that and that. So these are real, true story that it brings life more colorful. Anyhow, I came back to England. I established my office in London, and I went to, it's okay. I went to, I taught in 2 universities, and eventually life became more, I was disillusioned with my life and separated myself from my husband, and I came to New York with my son. So I started a complete new life. And because I was doing that, and my ex-husband asked me to at least give him the firm, even though I had started the firm, I gave him the BEB firm, and I had to start something new. Now, I was thinking most of our clients know me as the president of the firm, and I knew that my ex-husband, who was a very good designer also, didn't have capacity to hold into the business that we had by then, office in Paris, office in London. But he insists, and I give it to him. Now I have to come with a new idea, because I don't want to call the client and say, choose between him and I. I came up with a new way of thinking about architecture. Apparently, it connected me from my childhood. When I was 9 years old, I wanted to be an architect, but also I wanted to be Florence Nightingale. And no one knows how these two to connect. Florence Nightingale was attractive to me because it was helping humanity. So subconsciously, I wanted to find a way to help humanity, and the only thing I knew is architecture. I came up with the concept of accessible architecture, nothing to do with ADA, which 6 or 7 years afterward became sort of mandatory or act at the time. Anyhow, I wanted bring the architecture in the hand of public, make it possible for anybody who has a small project to also use architecture, architect, a good one. And I thought if the project is small and the budget is not big, it deserves more attention, because you can't make a mistake anymore. In a big project, you can make a mistake and doesn't matter. In a small project, everything is important. So I came up with this concept, and I knew that the word of mouth is not anymore enough. You need advertisement. And I was lucky enough that 1985, architect, doctor, lawyers, accountant finally were allowed to have advertisement. And I was the first person, as much as I know, that advertised as an architect in New York, advertised in paper, New York Times, 2-line ad that come to us, budget doesn't matter, size doesn't matter, use us and blah, blah, blah. And this advertisement grew and grew and grew to the extent that I was in the CNN, I was in WQXR, and my motto was, I did not become an architect to make a rich man richer. I want to make an impact in a society and bring better life for everyone through design. But the goal was to have a franchise type of offices, not to have one small office. My goal was office should become like a storefront that anybody who wants extension to their home, remodeling, the shop design, storefront, this and that, removal of code or whatever it is, be able to walk in, get the service, and our contract, I throw out the AIA contract or anything because those was meaningless. Our contract become a checklist. Tick, you want us to come to your site, 2 hours. You want us to give you sketches, 2 hours. You want us to give you a consultation, this many hours. I came up with a system that was really refined, and everything we were doing, I monitored it. So eventually, let me first show you that what are the type of project we did in that. For instance, this was my Hunter Elementary School was my son's school, and this area was behind these entrances that were going from one end of the school to another, was left behind. And the school was really lacking a playground for the kids inside during the winter. And I came up with a prototype of boxes that pushed it, not lining up, a little bit different way that create an atmosphere that was something like that. They gave me award because it was the most used space out of nothing. And this mirror in the back of the wall was there already, but no one was even noticing it before because they were passing by it straight through. And then it became a focal point of the school. Or, for instance, look at this little. From somebody who my first project out of a school was 20-story high building of a bank, to come up with this kind of a concept is, for instance, in this project, the client in Park Avenue, this was their, in this side was their dining room. Then there is a maid, then there is an ugly corridor, and their kitchen. They were asking me, we want to renovate our kitchen. Even though they had a maid, they just said the lady wants to go sometime in the kitchen, and it's not. I said, why don't we change the location of the maids in the other side, that you can go from the dining to the kitchen and use the 2 windows, which is uselessly used in the maid's room, use it as a kitchen and create a little cove area for breakfast. And by creating that kind of thing, how do you feel? You wake up, you go and sit, and you see a view, and you see anyhow, this type of understanding that a little project, like for instance, this was a storefront on the building that actually, on top of that building was our office on 5th Avenue and 20th Street. At the time of 1985, 86, that area of Manhattan was sort of a factory type. And all these beautiful gold, wonderful spaces were chopped by the partition and the coffer ceiling like this beautiful building. You can imagine if you have a coffer ceiling over it. All I did, I peel off all those and expose the beauty of old building. And this became trend in the whole Fifth Avenue of Lower Manhattan, and we did several other stores and really, oh, I don't want to get there yet. So this was the type of concept project that we were doing. And within only a prototype, we did over 400 projects. And believe me or not, I made more money out of this concept than any of my big project, which I did. I'm one of those architects. I have a business head also, and I did not lose any of my put any of my project into red, but nevertheless, this concept was so needed. Finally, the venture capital came and they wanted to expand it, and that was the goal. So we were only working on prototype. Venture capital from California, London, and New York. They all wanted to expand it, be a shareholder. Our lawyer found out that bylaw of architect doesn't allow that. Unheard of. I didn't know it when I started this concept. Anyhow, I'm going to tell you that the concept was unfortunately not liked, thank you very much, by many of our colleagues. Some would call me and they admire it. Some Institute of Architecture, as soon as they heard that my advertisements say, we service you, they said, no, we are not a service-oriented project. We are professional. Please read what my ask.
If you don't believe that architecture is a service to humanity, then I do not wish to be a part of it.
And this was really, really my belief. Architecture has to be service to humanity. Our building has to be uplifting to people. Anyhow, in one hand, I got an award for this concept from Mayor, Best Business Achievement Award, and I was paid $10,000 for it. In another hand, I gave up because we could not expand it. I finally closed the office, and right after that, I had many, many more calamity. I was told I have a cancer. I was robbed by my secretary, 49 check of mine signed by him. I was sued by my husband, lawyer, you name it, 15 different calamity all at once. I was just, you know, even as strong as you are, there are times that you say that's the end of it. I felt that way. So I look for a house, buying a cabin in the wood, and I search for a place that at least I can rejuvenate my soul. And I contacted a realtor in upstate New York, and in Connecticut, and real estate man said, I know exactly what you want. And when in the middle of the day, I went there and he showed me this place. I said, what? This looks like Arabic tent. I really didn't like it, especially when I reluctantly got out of the house and I touched the skin of it. It's built by foam, and the material is outside is a sort of a coated plastic for waterproofing. That's all I want, I said. I said, I want to have cabin in the wood, and you're showing me this junk. Reluctantly, I went inside, and what I saw inside was something like that, which, of course, the coloration is changed, but it was something extraordinary in the sense of feeling. All of a sudden, from anger and shouting at him and all of that, I became quiet, and I felt the word that comes to my mind, I felt that I'm in a womb of my mother, content, safe. you may not feel it as much here because I have opened up more window eventually, and I don't have the picture of the old time. But nevertheless, it was something that had changed my whole being. For 3 years, I was scared to show it to anybody because I was afraid that they said, oh, she really lost her head, leaving that beautiful husband and going to do those little job, and now she's buying this unusual home. But every weekend, I would go from New York, go over there, and rejuvenate myself. Simultaneously, there was a project that was going on, which is Baha'i House of Worship in India. Intellectually, I was against it. Intellectually, as an architect, I didn't believe those days that one should follow a form of lotus flower or anything like that. As a matter of fact, the designer is a student from the same School of Architecture in Tehran, 2 years below me, and the dean of our school laughed at him, and he said, I thought we have a school of architecture. I didn't know we have a school of flower making. So architects mentally were against it. And for all the time that this was getting built, there was a lot of a story behind my being converted from absolute dislike of this to the one that I finally went there for its inauguration, and I was melted. I was melted, and I didn't know why and how. And what is it that why all of a sudden, from complete dislike, when I went inside, I was coming like, wow. So with this idea of these two buildings, I start to think, what can be the result, or the reason, not the result, the reason for so much change of feeling. And I came up with understanding that space has spirit, and also there are some places that sings, and those motto came out of it. Some space are silence, some speaks, the one which are rare sings. And I came up with this feeling that we architects have to at least want to be the one who designed the places that sings. We have to aim it at least. It's not easy. To be so profound is not easy. Places that sings are like a phrase in writing that you cannot add one thing to it or take away something from it. And what are those? They are obviously have to be proportionate. They obviously have to have a good orientation. They have to be the same thought through all the way, not jumping from one idea to another. And that's the time that we architects have to give up our ego. We should not design for the sake of design. We should think of humanity and what brings that joy of uplifting to people. Then I established this topic of spirit of space, which I gave lecture over 87 countries. And now I'm writing a book about the spirit of space. And there are a lot I can say, but I think we don't have time. I only wanted to share with you one of my trip for this lecture of a spirit of space, which was in South Africa at the time of apartheid. And that was one of my early talks. And I was invited to a crowd of tribes that they were collectively giving a graduation party to one of their chief son who was graduated from the school. At those, in those days, in 70, I forgot the date, when still the country was during apartheid, and Mandela was in prison, and then the country was divided in 5 homeland, and one of those 5 homeland was Siskai. Siskai and all the other 4 homeland where only black people lived, and yet in Siskai, one of my friend who was a Baha'i, is a Baha'i, and Iranian married to an American, were teaching in their university. They were the only white. And I was invited to go to visit them, and I also was giving a talk at the university in Cape Town. Anyhow, in that village that I was invited, there were over 8,000 people sitting, and I didn't know anything about anything, what's going on. Nobody is translating the subject for me, and then they put me in the front of the crowd, and 2 hours of listening to the lecture, which I don't understand a word, and my translator was not telling me, and I keep telling me, let's go, let's go. I said, I'm never going to get out of here. I'm the only white person in that crowd. I wouldn't be embarrassed to do that, and I'm not going to do it. Finally, my name was called, and nobody had told me that I have to give a lecture, and they said, you have to go now and give a talk. What? I don't even know what's all about. What am I going to talk about? So I start shaking, and provoking God, help me to say something. What do I say? I came up with a talk, which I'm going to end. Please read that.
I stepped up nervously to the platform. My companion translated while I spoke to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, I have been in your country for only 1 week. We have all the differences in the world. I live in New York, on the 28th floor of a building. At this point, the throng lifted their chins to look toward the sky. I have a different colored skin. I have a different education and religion. And yet, I have never been happier in my life than I have been in this past week. I have asked God, with all these differences, why am I so happy here? And the answer has just come to me. I am connected to my spirit here, and the spirit does not have differences of color or education or culture. I ended my speech, and the crowd rose in a sea of applause.
That's what is the power of a spirit, and that's what we have to connect to it through our design. Young people, please don't go for a form for sake of form. There are spaces that speaks, but speaks meaning that provoke you, but we are not, it's not important. Go for the one that sings. Go for the one that sings. Thank you.
Thank you, Noushin Ehsan, for sharing about your life story. We really enjoyed all the moments that you described in your life. I think it was really interesting. And so I'll be handing the Q&A session, which will be moderated by Jamaica. So yeah.
So I'll start off with a question. What advice would you give to current architectural students in a culture that prioritized unaltered workmanship in comparison to the varied perseverance as highlighted within your memoir?
I unfortunately didn't hear the question. One more time.
What advice would you give to current architectural students in a culture that prioritized unaltered workmanship in comparison to the varied perseverance as highlighted within your memoir?
Can you tell me what's the question again?
When you say altered workmanship, what do you mean?
Like once you began a project, like you should not like waver from what you've already started. So like keep on the trajectory that you've been on.
That's an excellent question. Oh, my dear. Number one, pray. Number two, stay on the purpose of why you're designing and be honest with it. Are you designing it only to be publicized? Are you designing to be famous for it? Because there are some people designing only what looks good in a picture that it will be published in a magazine. And, or are you designing for many people? Are you designing it for yourself, or are you designing it for client? If you really solidified the answer to this and be very honest with you, then the proper design will come out of it. Am I clear what I'm saying?
Thank you, yeah. So, is anyone in the audience have any questions?
Unfortunately, I bored the audience. They left. I know, it's the end of the day and everybody is tired and it's exam time probably.
I have a question. So I love that you focused on the engagement between the spirit of space, but as well as the spirit of the individual. In your work, you have designed for moments of connection while enhancing each person's emotional and metaphysical experience. So what are ways that we can design for moments of anticipation, moments of connection with spaces and ourselves within them at different scales?
What are the moments that we, one more time, last part?
Oh, it's okay. For moments of connection and moments of anticipation within spaces.
I would have the same answer I mentioned. Another word, design is a creative thought process. But if our thought is clear, for instance, the house of worship in India that I show you, I have a story to tell you. This is the time, it was a competition, and it was at the time that I was teaching at Harvard and RPI. And the administration of Baha'is asked me also participate in this competition. And I was so arrogant that I said, if not me, who else? And of course, I will participate. And I was on my way to Iran during the summer. And I said, okay, I'll take the 3-month summer and I would design and sketch and obviously I will win. You know, arrogancy is not the answer. So I went, I sat down and I sketched. Every day I sketched. Nothing came out. Nothing. I am a good designer. Not a good thing came out of my sketches. I finally threw out the whole my sketches and I said to everyone, who wants to design this day's Baha'i house of worship? We have to be pragmatic, we have to be functional, blah, 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 blah. I came up with some kind of a answer to my inadequacy, and yet I gave up. Then I heard my friends was in India investigating what to do with the design and came up with this lotus, which is symbol of purity and so on and so forth. We all laugh at him. We said, he's crazy. He wants to build a flower. For 10 years, while it was under construction, I was literally asked by people, what do you think? As soon as they hear Baha'is, they hear I'm an architect also, what do you think of it? I would say, oh, this is junk. One day my mother said, stop it. People think you're jealous. Okay, yes, he's my schoolmate, so that's true. Until at the end, when it was finished, the administration asked me to help them for publicize it. I said, what? What do they want from me? God, are you testing me? I hate the building. So I went to other architects' friends, and they all hated it too. Architects didn't like it. We said, what are we going to do? So we said, okay, we hire a PR person to help us, the best PR of New York. We consult with him, and he said, she said, I'll charge $10,000 to stop Architectural Magazine to write about it. I said, what are you talking about? $10,000 to, they want, administration of Baha'i Faith wants us to publicize it among Architectural Magazine. She said, no, I'll charge you $10,000 to stop Golden, whatever it is, New York Times, he was the editor of the architecture, and all the, Goldberg, and all the other editor of the Architectural Magazine stopped writing about it. The key is public will love it. And when the public would love it, then the architectural magazine would pick it up. But if the architects first poison it and write bad article about it, public would be scared to like it intellectually. So can you imagine what I'm talking about? We followed her advice. We even paid her to not to publicize it, and yet 300 magazines publicized it at the cover page. The world embraced it. And then when I went there, and I was with my own feeling, I was converted. I was coming out in every conference that I was sitting, anybody opened their mouth to criticize the building architects. I would say, let me talk to you. I am a converted one. They would, for instance, say, the dean of Yale University in one conference said, oh, but it doesn't fit in the vocabulary of language of India, blah, 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 blah. If 40,000 people going per day over there, who are we as a few architects to say what is vocabulary? Do you understand what I'm talking about? We have to change our vocabulary of teaching architecture, how to serve humanity, how to get to the heart of the people. Intellectually, people don't say, I like or dislike. They're non-architect, they talk from here. And if we architects who are only thinker, a little bit open to that way of thinking, then our design become different. Did I make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Should we do just one more, and then, because there's a books if you also want to purchase.
You have a question? I had a question, but I think you answered this already. So, how has the religion of Baha'i connected with the interdisciplinary attributes of your practice?
Religion is not the goal. It's the faith. Faith is different than religion. You have to believe in higher being, in inspiration. Whether it's Islam, Christianity, Baha'i, Buddhism, whatever, the essence of all religion is faith, is unity. Of course, the clergies are changing their essence to dogma and power control and all of that. But faith is the issue. Have a faith on yourself, have a faith on your higher being, and ask for guidance. Connect to your higher being. Really, it helps. It's just somehow, it's hard to understand it, but it is there for you. Faith, don't matter what religion.
Thank you.
So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Noushin Ehsan, for sharing your journey. It was really amazing, again, to hear about all the amazing stories that you share about how meeting all these amazing architects and all the the hardships, and then the hardships you went through. It was really, truly inspiring, and I hope everyone gained insight and a glimpse of how amazing Noushin's journey was as an architect, and still, still practicing in the field and now giving lectures. So thank you so much for coming. Yeah.